For over a century, legendary stories have surrounded our great British airfields, inspiring generations, including me. That's why I'm on a personal mission to travel across the UK and visit some of our most significant airfields, not just to learn about their contributions to our past, but to understand how many have helped define our future. From the first flight in the UK to groundbreaking innovations like carbon fiber and the jet engine, and the extraordinary work of preserving our aviation heritage, join me as I explore the story of the airfields that have shaped Britain and, indeed, the world. Bentwaters, a Cold War icon. What you see here was once part of RAF Bentwaters, the last RAF base activated during World War II. Its first mission, a bomber escort, occurred in December 1944. But the 4 decades that followed the conflict, the era commonly known as the Cold War, truly defines Bentwaters' story. For over 40 years, Bentwaters stood on the front line of Western Europe's defense. But it wasn't the RAF in charge, because in 1951, the Americans arrived. Over the ensuing years, they brought not only aircraft, but nuclear weapons. In its heyday, this sprawling base was among the most secretive and restricted sites in the country. Today, many of Bentwaters' aircraft shelters house industrial or agricultural businesses, though a select few store historical Cold War aircraft, keeping the airfield spirit alive. The dawn of the Cold War. Hello, mate. Good to see you. Likewise. And what a fantastic collection. Some might be surprised that, after World War II, Britain found itself facing yet another potential conflict, the Cold War. But who first coined that phrase? The term Cold War was actually introduced by George Orwell in 1945. He wrote an article about the nuclear future, predicting a Cold War between the Soviet Union and the Western powers. During World War II, Britain, the United States, and the Soviet Union shared a common enemy, Nazi Germany. However, as soon as the war ended, tensions between the USSR and the West re-emerged. The Soviets wanted to spread communism. Western democracies demanded free governments in Eastern Europe. These clashing ideologies bred espionage, counter-espionage, threats, and deterrence, rooted in a new nuclear era. By 1949, the Soviets had created their first atomic weapon, partly through espionage, which matched America's. Soon, both sides progressed to thermonuclear bombs. The standoff never reached direct military confrontation between East and West, apart from notable events like Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane shoot-down over the USSR in 1960, and of course the Cuban Missile Crisis. That last scenario nearly ignited a global atomic war. In October 1962, the discovery of Soviet missile sites on Cuba, within striking distance of the U.S., led President Kennedy to impose a naval blockade. The Soviets deemed it an act of war, and both nations hovered on the brink of nuclear conflict. Jets, bombers, and the arms race. Here at Bentwaters, you'll find some of the finest post-war jet fighters and bombers ever built. From the Jaguar, currently under restoration, to the iconic Lightning and even the Meteor, Britain's first operational jet fighter. Could anyone really have won if the Cold War turned hot? In truth, everyone would have lost. From the late 1940s through the early 1990s, the Cold War's arms race spurred astonishing leaps in aviation technology. The Allied side alone saw dramatic development of jet aircraft and nuclear arms to counter perceived Soviet aggression. The revolutionary jet engine, a century of aviation technology, advanced at lightning speed, but perhaps no leap was greater than transitioning from piston engines to jets, a pioneering invention championed by British engineer Sir Frank Whittle. In March 1930, Whittle, then a young Central Flying School instructor, submitted the first turbojet patent, foreseeing a need to fly higher and faster with a new engine design. Initially, the RAF and Air Council offered minimal support, so the patent became publicly available. Germany soon pursued jet propulsion, flying the Heinkel He-178 in 1939. Britain's first jet-powered aircraft, the Gloucester E-2839, followed in 1941 to 42. Despite skepticism, the British government realized future air supremacy relied on jet engines. Simple in principle, suck, squeeze, bang, blow, The jet rapidly changed the battlefield, ensuring aircraft like the Avro Vulcan and English Electric Lightning could challenge Soviet threats at higher altitudes and greater speeds than piston-driven planes. Meteor flight. Experiencing early jet power. Before the Americans took over Bentwaters, the RAF stationed Meteors here. I've been lucky to fly in remarkable planes such as the Spitfire, but never in a first-generation jet like the Meteor. At Coventry Airport, I'm about to change that. Dad, good to see you. Great to see you too. Ready for a Meteor ride? Built in 1956 at Coventry, this particular Meteor closely mirrors the earliest wartime models. Originally introduced during World War II, the Meteor was a quantum leap over even late-model Spitfires. Once strapped in, the Meteor's acceleration is exhilarating. I immediately feel the difference. The engine thrust from behind, not a propeller pulling from the front. Cruising at 400+ mph, pulling Gs in graceful maneuvers, I marvel at how quickly technology advanced from 1930 to 1944. Just over a decade after early biplanes, the RAF had jets like this. It's simply awe-inspiring. Enter the nuclear age. In August 1945, 2 atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, ending World War II and launching an era defined by nuclear weapons. The world's leading nations, America, Britain, and the Soviet Union, raced to develop formidable nuclear arsenals. Orford Ness, less than 10 miles south of Bentwaters, lies Orford Ness, a major testing site for British atomic research. Founded in 1954, it housed laboratories to drop-test dummy warheads, ensuring they detonated only when intended. These tests included extreme vibrations, shocks, and environmental stresses, part of the MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction era. Its distinctive pagoda structures, with up to 10-foot thick concrete walls, contained blasts from conventional explosives so that no nuclear material ever scattered. Today, these haunting remains symbolize humanity's capacity for mass destruction. America takes charge at Bentwaters. By 1952, the U.S., UK, and USSR all possessed nuclear weapons, intensifying the Cold War. Under NATO, the Western Allies pooled resources, with the U.S. establishing bases across Europe, building bomb stores to capacity. In 1954, the F-84 Thunderstreak arrived at Bentwaters, altering its role from air defense to nuclear strike capability. Victor Alert pilots in the Cold War faced a new scramble. Victor Alert. Like the Battle of Britain scrambles, but nuclear-armed, pilots at Bentwaters stood ready near their barns, engines primed, pins removed from bombs. At the siren's scream, adrenaline pumping, they'd roar down the runway not knowing if nuclear war awaited. Britain's own deterrent came from the V-bomber force, Vulcan, Victor, Valiant, delivering the UK's nuclear capability. Until 1969, these aircraft carried the atomic sword, replaced eventually by Polaris submarines. This mission overshadowed each pilot's mind, though few believed they'd actually drop such devastating bombs. Cold War tactics shift. Bentwaters remained nuclear-armed through the 1960s and 1970s. Then, in 1978, an extensive modernization introduced hardened shelters and a specialized command bunker bracing for conventional, chemical, or biological warfare. Inside this command post, operators monitored chemical attacks with elaborate decontamination procedures and pressurized compartments. Pilots and ground crews adapted as the probable next conflict shifted away from all-out nuclear war toward limited conventional or chemical strikes. Secret sites and morale murals. Under Project Creek, Bentwaters gained robust aircraft shelters and hidden command centers, a shift from open dispersals to hardened positions. Meanwhile, the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing arrived with new A-10 Warthogs, specialized in ground attack rather than nuclear missions. As relations with the USSR remained tense, base personnel painted murals on their shelters and buildings. These sometimes depicted the Russian bear or grim reminders like, "We live so that others may die," underscoring the nuclear threat. Such artwork built cohesion, giving airmen a sense of shared identity against an unseen foe. The end of an era. The Cold War's final chapter came in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Economic decay and reform in the USSR, coupled with diplomatic breakthroughs, cooled the East-West standoff. With no immediate Soviet threat, Bentwaters was rendered obsolete. The base closed in 1993, leaving only memories of the superpower showdown. Today, few aircraft frequent Bentwaters' silent runway. Yet the site stands as a poignant monument to that unique chapter of history. Growing up nearby in the 1970s and 80s, I recall the looming possibility of nuclear war, an era marked by the phrase mutually assured destruction. Yet, ironically, this capacity to annihilate ourselves many times over may have guaranteed that war never happened. Here at Bentwaters, the quiet runway symbolizes how that once pervasive threat has lifted. Though it echoes with the ghosts of potential war, it also testifies to a peace maintained by deterrence and a world that moved away from Armageddon, one final scramble at a time.